What would you do to your mother-in-law if she poisoned you with wild mushrooms? Last Sunday at family dinner, my mother-in-law walked out of the kitchen carrying a huge bowl of risotto. I made something special tonight, she announced. Wild mushroom risotto with mushrooms I foraged myself. Everyone at the table got excited except me. I'd heard stories of people dying from misidentified mushrooms. She started serving everyone, and when she got to me, she piled an enormous portion from the very edge onto my plate. You're going to love this. I stared at the plate. Oh, I'm actually not that hungry. Her face changed immediately. What do you mean you're not hungry? I made this especially for you. My husband kicked me under the table. Just try it, babe. My mom knows what she's doing. Everyone else was already eating and saying how delicious it was. My father-in-law looked at me. You're being rude. She spent all afternoon on this. I picked up my fork and took a small bite. It tasted fine. My mother-in-law watched me from across the table with this intense look on her face. Have more. Don't be shy. I forced down a few more bites while she kept staring. Isn't it amazing? I picked these myself just yesterday. I nodded and tried to look grateful. She kept pushing. Finish your plate. There's plenty more if you want seconds. I ate about half of what she gave me before I couldn't take anymore. A few hours later at home, I started feeling sick. Really sick. I was vomiting so violently I couldn't stand up. My husband found me on the bathroom floor. We need to go to the hospital right now. At the emergency room, I could barely talk. The doctor asked what I'd eaten. When I mentioned wild mushrooms, his entire face changed. How long ago? They admitted me immediately. Over the next few hours, I got worse. My liver enzymes were through the roof. A toxicologist came in and started asking detailed questions about the mushrooms. What did they look like? Where were they foraged? How were they prepared? I didn't know any of the answers. My husband called his mother. I could hear him on the phone in the hallway. Mom, what kind of mushrooms were in the risotto? She's really sick. The doctors need to know. I heard him go quiet. Then his voice got louder. What do you mean it couldn't be the mushrooms? Nobody else got sick. Only her. The doctors told me my organs were starting to fail. If they couldn't identify the specific toxin, I might die. I spent 6 days in the hospital. They had to give me emergency treatments to try to save my liver. I survived, but the doctors told me I had permanent damage. I'd probably have health problems for the rest of my life. My husband finally got his mother to admit what mushrooms she'd used. The toxicologist identified them as death caps, one of the most poisonous mushrooms in the world. Even a small amount can kill you. When my mother-in-law came to visit me in the hospital, she acted like it was a tragic accident. I've been foraging for decades. I've never made a mistake like this. I don't know how it happened. But something felt wrong. My husband started asking questions. He drove out to the woods where his mother claimed she'd picked the mushrooms. There were no death caps growing there. He went through her house while she was at work. In her bedroom, he found a mushroom identification book with death cap mushrooms circled in red pen. Then he found her phone. There was a text to his aunt from the day before the dinner. I'm finally going to show her she's not good enough for my son. He came back to the hospital and showed me the text. We both just stared at it. He confronted his mother that night. At first, she denied everything, but eventually she broke down crying. She admitted she wanted to make me a little sick to embarrass me in front of the family. She didn't think it would be this bad. She just wanted me to throw up at dinner or have to run to the bathroom. She wanted to humiliate me. My husband sat on the edge of my hospital bed with his head in his hands. I don't know what to do. She's my mother. I told him I wanted to press charges. She tried to kill me. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Please don't send my mother to prison. She made a horrible mistake, but she didn't mean for it to go this far. Can't we just cut her out of our lives? I stared at him. The woman who gave birth to him had poisoned me and given me permanent organ damage, and he was asking me to let it go. I look at him sitting there on the edge of my hospital bed with tears in his eyes, and something inside me just breaks. Not in a dramatic way, but like a quiet crack that I know won't heal. The woman who gave birth to him fed me death cap mushrooms on purpose, gave me organ damage I'll have for the rest of my life, and he wants me to let it go because she's family. I can't even look at his face anymore. I turn my head toward the window and my hands are shaking. I need time to think, I tell him. But that's not really true. What I actually need is for him to leave because every second he sits here asking me to protect his mother makes me feel more alone than I've ever felt in my life. He reaches for my hand, but I pull it away. He stands up slowly and I can hear him crying, but I don't turn around. The door closes and I'm finally alone. I grab my phone off the bedside table and my hands are shaking so bad I almost drop it. I scroll through my contacts until I find Neve's name. She answers on the second ring and I can barely get the words out. Can you come to the hospital? I need you. She doesn't ask questions, just says she'll be there in an hour. I hang up and stare at the ceiling and try not to think about how the person I married just asked me to let my attempted murderer walk free. Neve arrives exactly 53 minutes later, and I know because I've been watching the clock. She comes through the door carrying a bag from the coffee shop, and takes one look at my face and immediately starts crying. She drops the bag on the chair and comes over to the bed and just holds my hand. We don't talk at first. She's crying and I'm crying and she's squeezing my hand so tight it almost hurts, but I need it. After a while, I start telling her everything. About the text message Ethan found. About the mushroom book with the death caps circled in red. About how Clarissa admitted she wanted to make me sick to embarrass me. About how Ethan just sat here and asked me not to press charges. Neve's face goes from sad to angry so fast I almost don't recognize her. He asked you what? Her voice is louder than I expected. I tell her again and she stands up and starts pacing. That's insane. That's actually insane. She's shaking her head and her hands are moving around like they do when she's really upset. I tell her he said his mother made a mistake and didn't mean for it to go this far. Neve stops pacing and looks at me. You know that's garbage, right? She circled death caps in a book. She texted about showing you you're not good enough. That's not a mistake. Neve sits back down and takes both my hands. She's looking right at me and her voice is calmer now but firm. What Ethan is asking you to do is completely unreasonable and you know it. I nod because I do know it, but I needed to hear someone else say it. She keeps going. Think about it this way. If your mom had poisoned Ethan and given him permanent organ damage, would you ask him to just forget about it? I shake my head. Exactly. You would never ask him that. So why is he asking you? The double standard is so obvious when she says it out loud that I feel stupid for not seeing it clearly before. She tells me that Ethan's request shows where his real loyalty is, and it's not with me. I want to argue, but I can't because she's right. A husband who actually put me first wouldn't be asking me to protect the woman who tried to kill me. He'd be the one calling the police. Neve squeezes my hands again. You have to do what's right for you, not what makes his life easier. There's a knock on the door and a woman in scrubs comes in. She introduces herself as the social worker and says she's doing routine checks on patients. She has a clipboard and starts asking standard questions about my support system and discharge plans. But she must notice something in my face because she stops mid-sentence and asks if I'm okay beyond just the medical stuff. I don't mean to, but I start crying again. Niamh looks at the social worker and then at me and asks if I want her to step out. I shake my head. The social worker pulls up a chair and her whole manner changes from routine to actually concerned. What's going on? So I tell her. About the poisoning being intentional. About the evidence Ethan found. About his mother's confession. About how my husband just asked me not to press charges. She listens to everything without interrupting and her face gets more serious as I talk. When I finish, she's quiet for a minute. Then she reaches into her bag and pulls out a card. I want you to call this number. She's a victim advocate who specializes in cases involving family violence. I take the card and stare at it. Family violence. That's what this is. The social worker writes something else on a piece of paper. These are some other resources. Support groups, legal aid, counseling services. You don't have to decide anything right now, but you should know your options. She stands up and puts her hand on my shoulder. What happened to you wasn't an accident. You deserve justice and support, whatever you decide to do. That night, I can barely sleep. The hospital is never really quiet and every noise makes me jump, but it's not the sounds keeping me awake. My mind keeps replaying Ethan's words and the look on his face when he asked me to protect his mother. I keep thinking about how he found all that evidence. The mushroom book, the text message, his mother's confession. He saw all of it. He knows she did this on purpose. And somehow he still expects me to just let it go. To prioritize his feelings and his family over my own safety and justice. I roll over and my side hurts where the IV is taped. Everything hurts, actually. My whole body aches from the poisoning and the treatments. I have permanent liver damage because Clarissa decided I wasn't good enough for her son. And Ethan wants me to pretend it was just a mistake. The betrayal from him almost hurts worse than what his mother did. At least I expected his mother to hate me. I didn't expect my husband to choose her over me. I watch the numbers on the clock change. 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. The sky starts getting lighter outside my window and I still haven't slept. The next morning, a different doctor comes in. She's the toxicologist who's been managing my case. She has a folder full of papers and she sits down in the chair next to my bed. I need to talk to you about your long-term prognosis, she says. My stomach drops because her tone is serious. She opens the folder and starts going through my test results. My liver function is permanently compromised. I'll need blood work every 3 months for the rest of my life to monitor for complications. I'm at increased risk for liver disease and liver cancer. If I ever need surgery or get sick, my liver might not be able to handle it. She's using clinical terms, but I understand what she's really saying. Clarissa's attempt to embarrass me has given me a lifetime of medical problems. The doctor keeps talking about medications I might need eventually, and lifestyle changes I should make. No alcohol ever. Limited acetaminophen. Careful with any medications that process through the liver. I'm 32 years old, and I'm living with the health profile of someone much older, because my mother-in-law fed me poison. The doctor asks if I have questions. I ask if it will get better. She pauses and then says no. This is permanent damage. We're just trying to prevent it from getting worse. After she leaves, I sit there staring at the wall and thinking about how Ethan wants me to let his mother face no consequences for this. Later that morning, Ethan comes back. He's carrying coffee and acting like our conversation yesterday didn't happen. He starts talking about discharge plans and recovery at home and what we need to pick up from the pharmacy. I let him talk for a minute and then I interrupt him. Who's home? He looks confused. What do you mean? I sit up straighter in the bed even though it hurts. You said recovery at home. Whose home do you mean? He still looks confused. Our apartment. Where else? I can't believe he doesn't get it. I'm never going near your mother's house again. Ever. You understand that, right? His face changes and he looks hurt. I meant our place. I wasn't talking about my parents' house. But the fact that he didn't immediately understand why I'd never feel safe around his family again tells me everything I need to know. He sits down in the chair and runs his hands through his hair. This is going to be hard for a while, but we'll get through it. I almost laugh. He thinks this is something we'll just get through like a rough patch. He doesn't understand that his mother tried to kill me and he asked me to protect her. That's not something you just get through. I look at Ethan and ask him something I should have asked yesterday. Have you told your father about the evidence you found? He shifts in his chair and won't meet my eyes. I told him some of it. I wait. What exactly did you tell him? Ethan sighs. That she feels terrible. I feel my hands clench into fists. Did you tell him about the text message? About the mushroom book with death caps circled in red? About how she admitted she wanted to make me sick on purpose? He's quiet. Did you tell him any of that? Ethan shakes his head. I didn't want to destroy the family. And there it is. He's already decided to protect his mother. He found all that evidence and showed it to me, but he's not going to tell anyone else. He's hoping I'll just go along with keeping it quiet. I realize he never actually wanted me to make my own decision about pressing charges. He just wanted me to make the decision he wanted. So, you're going to let everyone think it was an accident? He looks at me and his eyes are pleading. It doesn't have to be a big thing. We can just move on. I turn away from him because I can't stand to look at his face anymore. Neve comes back around noon and she watches Ethan carefully when he's in the room. He's polite to her, but there's tension. He makes small talk about work and the weather, and Neve gives short answers. After about 20 minutes, he says he's going to get coffee and leaves. As soon as the door closes, Neve turns to me. Are you okay? I shrug. She moves closer to the bed. I'm worried about what's going to happen when you go home with him. I don't say anything because I'm worried too. Neve keeps talking. Is he going to pressure you constantly to drop this? Are you going to be safe making decisions that anger his family? I hadn't thought about it that way, but she's right. If I press charges, his whole family will hate me. And I'll be living with Ethan, who clearly wants me to protect his mother. What if he tries to talk you out of it every single day? What if his family starts calling and showing up? My concerns are exactly what she's saying. I don't know if I can handle that kind of pressure while I'm trying to recover from being poisoned. Neve sits on the edge of the bed. Maybe you should stay somewhere else for a while. With your parents or with me, just until you figure things out. I tell her I'll think about it, but I'm already pretty sure she's right. That afternoon, there's another knock on the door and Ethan's sister Perdita walks in. I tense up immediately because I assume she's here to defend Clarissa. The whole family has probably rallied around poor mom who made an innocent mistake. But Perdita comes straight over to the bed and hugs me carefully, avoiding the IV lines. I'm so sorry, she says. There's no excuse for what my mother did. I'm so surprised I don't know what to say. Perdita pulls back and sits in the chair. Ethan called me yesterday and told me everything. The text message, the mushroom book, all of it. She shakes her head. I'm not surprised, honestly. I've had my own issues with her over the years. This is not what I expected. Perdita looks tired and sad. My mom has always been controlling and jealous when it comes to her sons. She's driven away girlfriends before. She made Ethan's last girlfriend so miserable that the poor girl broke up with him just to get away from the family. I'm staring at Perdita because this is the first time anyone in Ethan's family has acknowledged that Clarissa might actually be a problem. I just never thought she'd go this far. I never thought she'd actually hurt someone. Perdita reaches over and squeezes my hand. Whatever you decide to do, I support you. If you press charges, I'll back you up. My mom needs to face consequences for once in her life. I look at Perdita and something clicks into place about why this feels so calculated. She shifts in the chair and glances toward the door before continuing. Clarissa has always had problems with women Ethan dated, she tells me. Always found ways to make them feel unwelcome or not good enough. Ethan had a girlfriend before me, a woman named Rachel who lasted almost 2 years. Clarissa criticized everything about her, from her clothes to her job to the way she laughed. She'd make little comments at family dinners about how Rachel wasn't really family material, how she seemed flighty or unreliable. She organized family events and forgot to invite Rachel, then acted shocked when Rachel got upset. She told Ethan repeatedly that Rachel was using him, that she could see through Rachel's act even if he couldn't. The relationship ended when Rachel finally told Ethan she couldn't take his mother's constant attacks anymore. Ethan chose his mother then too, Perdita says, and Rachel left. Clarissa threw a family party the week after the breakup to celebrate Ethan being free again. Perdita watched it all happen and felt sick about it, but didn't know how to intervene without causing a bigger family explosion. She never thought her mother would escalate to actual physical harm, though. The mushroom poisoning crosses a line she didn't think Clarissa would cross, even with her history of sabotaging relationships. But looking back now, Perdita says the text message about me not being good enough fits perfectly with how Clarissa has always operated. She sees her son's partners as threats to her control over them, as competition for their attention and loyalty. I feel cold hearing this because it means what happened to me wasn't random or isolated. It was part of a pattern, just taken to an extreme that almost killed me. I need to know something, and I ask Perdita directly if she thinks Clarissa really meant to make me just a little sick, or if she knew death caps could kill me. Perdita goes quiet and looks down at her hands. The silence stretches out, and I can see her choosing her words carefully. Finally, she looks up and meets my eyes. Her mother is smarter than she pretends to be, Perdita says slowly. Someone who has foraged for decades would know exactly how dangerous death caps are. They're one of the most well-known poisonous mushrooms in the world. Every foraging guide has warnings about them. Every experienced forager knows to avoid them completely. The idea that Clarissa accidentally picked them, or thought they would just cause mild stomach upset, doesn't make sense with her level of experience. Perdita doesn't say the words directly, but the meaning is clear. She thinks her mother knew exactly what she was doing when she fed me those mushrooms. She thinks Clarissa meant to cause serious harm, maybe even death. The implication sits between us like a physical presence. I feel my hands start shaking because hearing it from someone in Ethan's family makes it more real. His own sister thinks his mother tried to kill me on purpose. Not embarrass me, not make me a little sick. Actually kill me. The door opens and Ethan walks back in holding a coffee cup. He stops when he sees Perdita still sitting there, and the atmosphere in the room changes immediately. The air feels thick and uncomfortable. He looks between us with suspicion on his face and asks what we've been talking about. Perdita doesn't hesitate or try to soften it. She tells him directly that she supports me pressing charges if that's what I decide to do. She says their mother crossed a line that can't be uncrossed and there need to be consequences. Ethan's face goes pale and then red. He stares at his sister like she just slapped him. He asks how she can turn on their mother, how she can side with me over family. His voice gets louder and other patients or nurses in the hallway might hear, but he doesn't seem to care. Perdita stays calm and her voice doesn't rise to match his. She tells him she's not turning on anyone. Clarissa turned on basic human decency when she deliberately poisoned someone. Family doesn't mean protecting people who commit crimes. Family doesn't mean covering up attempted murder. Ethan starts pacing at the foot of my bed and his hands are clenched into fists. He's not threatening, just agitated and upset. He keeps saying his mother made a mistake. She didn't mean for it to be this bad. She's sorry. Families are supposed to forgive each other. His voice has a desperate edge to it that makes him sound younger, like a kid trying to convince himself of something he doesn't quite believe. Perdita counters each point methodically without getting emotional. She asks him if he would be this forgiving if someone outside the family had done this to me. If a stranger had poisoned me and given me permanent organ damage, would he be asking me to just let it go? If my mother had poisoned him, would he think forgiveness was appropriate? Ethan doesn't have good answers to any of these questions. He fumbles for words and keeps coming back to the same things about family and loyalty and giving people second chances. Perdita points out that their mother had decades of chances to be a decent person, and she chose to poison someone instead. She points out the text message, the circled mushrooms in the book, the lie about where she foraged them. None of that is consistent with an innocent mistake. Ethan's face crumples and he sits down heavily in the other chair. He looks at me with tears starting to form in his eyes. He tells Perdita she doesn't understand. She wasn't there. She doesn't know what it's like to watch your mother break down crying and admitting she made a horrible mistake. Perdita's expression softens slightly, but her voice stays firm. She tells him she does understand that it's painful, but pain doesn't change facts. Their mother committed a serious crime and almost killed someone. The fact that she's crying about it now doesn't undo the damage. Ethan puts his head in his hands and his shoulders shake. The argument seems to drain out of him all at once. Perdita stands up and comes over to give me a careful hug. She tells me again that she supports whatever I decide and I can call her anytime. She looks at Ethan and her expression is sad but resolute. She tells him she loves him, but she can't support him protecting their mother from consequences she earned. Then she leaves and the room feels even smaller with just me and Ethan in it. He sits in the chair not looking at me for several long minutes. I can hear his breathing, uneven like he's trying not to cry harder. Finally, he looks up and his face is red and wet with tears. He tells me he knows his mother was wrong. He knows what she did was terrible. But he can't stand the thought of her going to prison. She's still his mom, and despite everything, he loves her. He's terrified of losing her. Terrified of what prison would do to her. She's not a young woman anymore, and the idea of her in a cell makes him feel physically sick. He says all this while crying, and I feel a brief flash of sympathy for him. He's in an impossible position, and I can see how much pain he's in. But then I remember where I am. I'm in a hospital bed with permanent liver damage. I'm the one who almost died. I'm the one who will need medical monitoring for the rest of my life. His mother did this to me deliberately, and he's asking me to protect her from facing any real consequences for it. I tell Ethan I understand he loves his mother. I get that this is hard for him, but I need him to understand what he's actually asking of me. He's asking me to live with permanent health problems for the rest of my life, while my attacker faces nothing. He's asking me to show up at family gatherings and pretend everything is fine while the woman who poisoned me sits across the table. He's asking me to carry the weight of this trauma completely alone, so his family can stay comfortable and avoid the embarrassment of having a criminal in their midst. I tell him he's asking me to prioritize his feelings and his mother's freedom over my own safety and right to justice. Every word makes him cry harder, but he doesn't take back his request. He doesn't say he'll support me no matter what I decide. He just sits there crying, and I realize he's already made his choice. He's choosing his mother. He's hoping if he cries enough and looks miserable enough, I'll feel too guilty to press charges. The manipulation of it makes me angry in a way I haven't felt before during this whole nightmare. I turn my face away from him because I can't look at him anymore without feeling disgusted. The phone on the bedside table rings later that evening after Ethan has left. It's the victim advocate that Neve helped me contact. Her voice is professional but warm, and she asks if this is a good time to talk. I tell her yes, and she launches into a detailed explanation of my options. She walks me through the process for pressing charges step by step. I would need to give a formal statement to the police. They would collect all the evidence, including the text message, the mushroom identification book, testimony from the toxicologist, and Clarissa's partial confession. The prosecutor would review everything and decide whether to file charges. If they moved forward, there would be a trial unless Clarissa accepted a plea deal. The advocate is honest with me that family violence cases are complicated. Juries sometimes have sympathy for family members, and defense attorneys are good at creating reasonable doubt. But she also tells me I have unusually strong evidence. The text message shows premeditation. The mushroom book shows research. The toxicologist can testify that an experienced forager would know how deadly death caps are. My medical records prove the severity of harm. She says it's a solid case even though nothing is guaranteed. She explains possible outcomes ranging from probation to significant prison time depending on what charges the prosecutor files and what a jury decides. She talks for almost 30 minutes, and I take notes on a pad of paper the hospital provided. Having concrete information helps me feel less powerless about the situation. Then the advocate asks a question that stops me cold. She wants to know if I feel safe going home with Ethan given his stance on protecting his mother. I open my mouth to say yes automatically, but the word doesn't come out. I realize I don't actually know how to answer that question. I don't think Ethan would physically hurt me. He's never been violent or threatening, but I'm also not sure I can trust him to prioritize my well-being over his family loyalty. What happens if I press charges and his whole family starts calling me and showing up at our apartment? What happens if they pressure me constantly to drop the case? What happens if Ethan joins in that pressure because he's desperate to protect his mother? Would I be safe making decisions that anger his entire family while living with him? The advocate seems to hear my hesitation even through the phone. She suggests gently that I might want to consider staying somewhere else initially while I figure things out, maybe with my parents or a friend, just until I have clarity about what I want to do and whether my marriage can survive this. She gives me information about resources for temporary housing if I need them. She also gives me her direct cell number and tells me to call anytime, day or night, if I need to talk, or if I feel unsafe. After we hang up, I sit holding the phone and staring at nothing. The idea that I might not be safe in my own home with my own husband hadn't fully occurred to me before. But now that she's said it out loud, I can't stop thinking about it. That night, after the hospital has gone quiet, I call my parents for the first time since the poisoning happened. My mother answers on the second ring, and her voice is anxious, asking if I'm okay. I tell her I'm physically stable, but I need to talk to them about everything. Then I tell them the whole story. The mushroom dinner, the hospitalization, the permanent organ damage, the evidence Ethan found, Clarissa's confession that she meant to make me sick, the text message about me not being good enough. My mother makes small, shocked sounds while I talk, and I can hear my father asking questions in the background. When I get to the part about Ethan asking me not to press charges, my mother's voice goes hard. She tells me immediately that I should come stay with them during my recovery. She says I shouldn't be anywhere near Ethan's family right now, and maybe not even near Ethan himself. Her protectiveness makes me start crying because I've felt so alone trying to navigate this with only Neve truly on my side. He asks in measured tones if I'm pressing charges. I tell him I'm seriously considering it, but I haven't made a final decision yet. He's quiet for a moment and then tells me that whatever I decide, he and my mother support me completely. But he also says that woman tried to kill me, and if I don't press charges, she'll never face consequences for it. He says it like a statement of fact, not trying to pressure me, just laying out reality. We talk for another 20 minutes about logistics and my health and when I might be discharged. They say they'll drive up first thing in the morning. My parents arrive at the hospital around 9 the next morning, and the relief I feel seeing them walk through the door is overwhelming. My mother rushes to the bed and hugs me carefully, avoiding the IV lines and monitors. She starts crying, and I cry too. My father stands at the foot of the bed looking at me with an expression I've never seen before, something between grief and rage. He picks up my medical chart from the end of the bed and starts reading through it with a grim look on his face. He's an engineer, not a doctor, but he understands enough to grasp what the numbers mean. He asks me questions about my liver function and prognosis, and I explain what the toxicologist told me about permanent damage and lifelong monitoring. My mother holds my hand and keeps touching my face like she needs to confirm I'm really here and alive. They ask about pain levels and medications and whether I'm eating okay. Normal parent questions, but infused with an intensity that shows how scared they were. My father talks to my nurse when she comes in to check vitals and asks detailed questions about my care plan. My mother asks about discharge procedures and what kind of support I'll need at home. They're taking charge in a way that makes me realize how much I've been floundering trying to handle this mostly alone. Ethan provided some support, but he was always torn and conflicted. My parents are completely on my side with no divided loyalties, and that clarity feels like a gift. Ethan walks through the door about 20 minutes later, and the temperature in the room drops. My father stands up from his chair and crosses his arms. My mother stays next to my bed, but her hand tightens around mine. Ethan looks tired, and his eyes are red like he's been crying. He nods at my parents and says good morning, but his voice sounds strained. My father doesn't return the greeting. He just stares at Ethan with this cold expression I've never seen him wear before. My mother makes a small gesture toward the empty chair, but nobody moves to sit. The silence stretches out until it becomes painful. Finally, my father speaks up and asks Ethan directly what he thinks should happen to Clarissa. Ethan's face goes pale, and he starts talking about how she's his mother, and families make mistakes and people deserve forgiveness. He says Clarissa didn't mean for things to go this far, and she's sorry, and tearing the family apart won't fix what happened. My father's expression gets even colder as Ethan talks. When Ethan finishes his speech about family loyalty and second chances, my father tells him in this quiet, controlled voice that his mother committed attempted murder. He says if Ethan can't see that, then he's part of the problem. Ethan looks shocked and starts to argue, but my father cuts him off. He points out that I'm lying in a hospital bed with permanent organ damage because Clarissa deliberately fed me poison. He asks Ethan if he would feel the same way if some stranger had done this to me. Requested Reds is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Ethan doesn't have an answer for that. My mother speaks up then, and her voice is gentle but firm. She tells Ethan that I'll be recovering at their house and he's welcome to visit, but they need to discuss boundaries first. Ethan turns to look at me with this desperate expression and asks if I'm leaving him. The question hangs in the air, and I realize I don't know how to answer it. I haven't made that decision yet, but my parents are already preparing for it. They've already decided our marriage might not survive this. The weight of that assumption fills the room and makes it hard to breathe. I tell Ethan I just need time to recover and think. He nods, but he looks crushed. My nurse comes in then and says the doctor is ready to start my discharge process. Everyone seems relieved to have something to focus on besides the tension. The discharge takes hours. A different nurse comes in with a huge stack of papers about my medications. She goes through each one explaining what it's for and when to take it, and what side effects to watch for. There are pills for my liver and pills to prevent infection and pills for pain. She gives me a schedule written out on a chart because there are so many I'll never remember them all. Then the toxicologist comes back and sits down to talk about my follow-up care. She tells me I need to see a liver specialist every 3 months for the rest of my life. She explains that my liver damage is permanent, and I'm at higher risk now for liver disease and cancer. She lists symptoms that would mean I need to go to the emergency room right away. Things like yellowing skin, or severe pain, or confusion. Each warning feels like another weight being added to what Clarissa did to me. The toxicologist asks if I have questions, and I can barely think of any because I'm so overwhelmed. My mother asks most of the questions while my father writes everything down in a notebook. Ethan stands in the corner looking lost. After the toxicologist leaves, a social worker stops by to make sure I have support at home. She asks about my living situation and whether I'll have help. My mother explains I'm staying with them, and they'll make sure I take my medications and get to my appointments. The social worker seems satisfied and gives me more papers about support groups and counseling services. Finally, around 2 in the afternoon, they say I can leave. Ethan helps me pack my things from the hospital room. He folds my clothes and collects my phone charger and the flowers Neve brought. He keeps trying to talk about our recovery plan and how we'll manage my medications at home. But I keep saying my recovery plan and my medications, and I can see him noticing the difference. Every time he says our and I say my, his face falls a little more. When everything is packed, he asks if we can talk privately before I leave with my parents. I'm exhausted and want to just go, but I agree because we probably need to have this conversation. We walk down to a quiet waiting area near the elevators. Ethan takes my hands and looks at me with tears in his eyes. He tells me he loves me and he's sorry for what his mother did, and he knows it's not fair what he's asking. I wait for him to say something that will make this better. But then he starts talking about everything he's lost. He says he's lost his trust in his mother, and his sense of family safety, and his belief that his parents are good people. He says he can't lose his mother to prison too, because it would destroy what's left of his family. As he talks, I realize he's making this whole thing about his loss instead of mine. He's the victim in his own mind because his world got shaken up. I pull my hands away from his. I tell him I'm the one who almost died. I'm the one with permanent organ damage. I'm the one who has to live with this for the rest of my life. His mother made a choice to poison me, and now there are consequences. It's not my job to protect her from those consequences just to make his life easier. He looks hurt and tries to reach for me again, but I step back. I tell him I'm too tired and angry to have this conversation right now. He looks like I just hit him, but I don't care. My parents take me to their house, and the familiar streets make me feel like I'm going backward in time. They settle me in my old bedroom, which still has posters on the walls from high school. My mother brings me soup and crackers. My father checks on me every 20 minutes, asking if I need anything. I realize they're treating me like I'm made of glass because right now I kind of am. That night, I lie in my childhood bed and stare at the ceiling. I think about how my whole life has changed because my mother-in-law decided I wasn't good enough for her son. Everything I thought I knew about my marriage and my future is different now. Over the next few days, I start to feel stronger. My body is healing even if everything else is a mess. Ethan calls and texts constantly. Sometimes he apologizes. Sometimes he defends his mother. Sometimes he just says he misses me. I respond once in a while, but mostly I need space to think without his guilt and pressure weighing on me. Neve visits on the fourth day and brings a folder full of printed articles. She sits on my bed and shows me research she did about death cap poisoning cases and legal outcomes. She's found news stories about other people who were intentionally poisoned and what happened to the people who did it. In most cases, with clear evidence of intent, the poisoners went to prison. Some for years. She shows me one case that's really similar to mine where a woman poisoned her daughter-in-law and got 8 years. Neve asks gently if I'm really considering letting Clarissa walk away from this. I admit that I keep thinking about what pressing charges would mean for my marriage. I wonder if Ethan would ever forgive me. I wonder if I'd be destroying a whole family. Neve gets angry then in a way I've rarely seen from her. She tells me I need to stop thinking about everyone else's feelings and start thinking about justice and my own safety. She points out that Clarissa showed no concern for destroying me when she fed me those mushrooms. She asks why I'm protecting someone who tried to kill me. I don't have a good answer for that. The next morning, my phone rings while I'm still in bed. I don't recognize the number, but I answer anyway. A man's voice introduces himself as Detective Warren and asks if I have time to talk about my case. I sit up and tell him yes. He explains that they've been building a case against Clarissa based on the evidence Ethan found and my medical records. The text message to the aunt shows she planned this ahead of time. The mushroom identification book with death caps circled proves she knew what she was doing. Her decades of foraging experience makes the accident claim impossible to believe. The toxicology reports show the amount of poison I ingested was consistent with intentional harm. He says they have enough to press charges, but they need my cooperation to move forward. I ask what would happen if I decide to press charges. He tells me Clarissa would be arrested and charged with attempted murder or aggravated assault, depending on what the prosecutor thinks they can prove. There would be a trial unless she takes a plea deal. He's honest that these cases are hard and outcomes vary, but the evidence here is stronger than most family violence cases he's seen. He gives me a week to decide and tells me to call him when I'm ready. After we hang up, I sit there holding my phone and feeling the weight of that decision pressing down on me. An hour later, my phone rings again. This time it's a number with the same area code as Ethan's family. I almost don't answer, but something makes me pick up. A man's voice asks if this is me, and when I say yes, he tells me he's Douglas, Ethan's older brother. I'm surprised because Ethan barely talks about Douglas, and I've only met him once at a family gathering years ago. Douglas says Perdita called him and told him what happened. He's calling because he wants me to know he supports whatever decision I make about pressing charges. He tells me he's been estranged from Clarissa for almost 8 years now, because of her manipulative and controlling behavior. She's done terrible things to people who threatened her sense of control over her children. He says what she did to me doesn't surprise him at all, and he thinks she should face real consequences. I ask him what he means by terrible things. Douglas is quiet for a moment, and then he starts telling me about his engagement 12 years ago. He was dating a woman named Rachel, who he planned to marry. Clarissa hated Rachel from the start because Rachel didn't put up with Clarissa's controlling behavior. Rachel would call Clarissa out when she tried to manipulate Douglas, or make decisions for them as a couple. About 2 months before the wedding, Clarissa started spreading lies about Rachel to the whole family. She told Bernard that Rachel was cheating on Douglas. She told Ethan and Perdita that Rachel was using Douglas for his money. She told extended family members that Rachel had a drug problem. None of it was true, but Clarissa was so convincing that people started believing her. The family drama got so bad that Rachel couldn't handle it anymore. She told Douglas she loved him, but she couldn't marry into a family where his mother would constantly sabotage their relationship. Douglas tried to fix things, but by then the damage was done. Rachel broke off the engagement and moved to another state. Douglas confronted Clarissa about the lies, and she denied everything at first. When he showed her proof that her claims were false, she broke down crying and said she was just trying to protect him because she had a bad feeling about Rachel. Douglas stopped talking to her after that. He tells me he's always regretted not standing up to her more firmly back then. He wishes he'd pressed the issue harder or cut her off completely sooner. He doesn't want me to make the same mistake of letting her get away with destructive behavior just to keep the peace. He says if I decide to press charges, he'll testify about her character and pattern of behavior. His support makes me feel less alone in this decision. We talk for almost an hour, and by the end I'm crying because someone in Ethan's family finally gets it. 3 days later, I have my first follow-up appointment with a gastroenterologist who will manage my ongoing liver care. My mother drives me to the medical building and waits in the reception area while I go back. The doctor is a woman in her 50s with gray hair and a calm manner. She examines me and reviews my lab results on her computer. She explains that my liver is functioning adequately right now, but the damage from the death cap toxin makes me vulnerable to complications. My liver enzymes are still elevated, which means there's ongoing inflammation. I'll need blood work every 3 months to monitor for problems. She asks me directly if the poisoning was intentional. I'm surprised by the bluntness of the question, but I tell her yes. She nods and says she wants to document everything thoroughly for legal purposes. She takes detailed notes about the poisoning, my symptoms, my treatment, and my current condition. She tells me she's treated other poisoning victims over the years, and she's seen how the psychological trauma compounds the physical damage. The body and mind are connected, and when someone deliberately harms you, it affects your healing. She recommends I start therapy to process what happened. She gives me names of 3 therapists who specialize in trauma from interpersonal violence. The clinical way she describes what Clarissa did as interpersonal violence makes it feel more real and serious. It's not just a family dispute or a mistake. It's violence that one person chose to inflict on another person. The doctor tells me to call her office if I have any symptoms like nausea, abdominal pain, yellowing skin, or dark urine. She schedules my next appointment for 3 months out. That evening, I finally call Ethan and tell him I need to see him in person to talk. He asks if everything is okay, and I say we just need to talk. He arrives at my parents' house within an hour looking exhausted and hopeful. My father lets him in but doesn't make small talk. We go out to the backyard and sit in the patio chairs. I tell him I've been thinking a lot about what pressing charges would mean, and I need to know where he stands. Ethan takes a deep breath and says his position hasn't changed. He thinks his mother should face some consequences, but not prison. Maybe therapy or probation or community service. Something that holds her accountable but doesn't destroy the family. I ask him what consequences he thinks are appropriate for someone who deliberately poisoned another person and caused permanent organ damage. He doesn't have a good answer. He just keeps saying it's complicated and she's still his mother. I tell him about my doctor's appointment, about how I'll need monitoring every 3 months for the rest of my life, about my increased risk for liver disease and cancer, about the medications I'll probably need eventually, about how the damage is permanent and irreversible. I ask him if he thinks therapy and community service are proportionate consequences for giving someone a lifetime of medical complications. He starts crying and says he doesn't know what's right anymore. We sit in silence for a while. The sun is setting and the backyard is getting dark. Finally, I ask him the question that's been haunting me. If our positions were reversed, if my mother had poisoned him and given him permanent damage, would he press charges or would he protect her? He's quiet for a long time. I watch his face in the fading light and I can see him really thinking about it. Then he admits he'd probably press charges. The admission hangs between us, and neither of us knows what to say after that. I tell Ethan I need more time to decide, but I also need him to stop pressuring me to protect his mother. I need him to support whatever decision I make, even if it's not the one he wants. He asks if I'm saying our marriage depends on this. I realize that's exactly what I'm saying. He looks devastated, but he nods. 3 days later, I sit across from the victim advocate in her office, and she spreads papers across the desk between us. She explains that pressing charges doesn't guarantee Clarissa will go to prison because there could be plea deals or probation or suspended sentences. But not pressing charges guarantees she faces no legal consequences at all. She looks at me directly and asks what I can live with long term, what choice I can make and not regret 20 years from now. I tell her I need to think about it and she nods, sliding her business card across the desk. That night, I lie in my childhood bed and think about the text message Clarissa sent to Ethan's aunt. I'm finally going to show her she's not good enough for my son. I think about how she watched me eat the poisoned mushrooms with that intense stare, how she kept pushing me to eat more. I think about how she denied everything at first until Ethan confronted her with the evidence he found. I think about how she claimed it was an accident when she has decades of foraging experience and would know exactly what death caps look like. The next morning, I'm sitting at my parents' kitchen table when it hits me with complete clarity. Clarissa knew exactly what she was doing when she chose death cap mushrooms. She picked the most deadly mushrooms she could find because she wanted to hurt me badly. Her story about wanting to make me a little sick is just another lie to minimize what she did. She's still trying to control the narrative and avoid real consequences. I pick up my phone and call the detective. My hand shakes as I tell him I want to press charges. He sounds relieved and says he'll start the process right away. After I hang up, I sit there for a long time just holding my phone. Despite my nervousness about what comes next, I feel something settle inside me, a sense of rightness about choosing justice over protecting people who hurt me. I wait until the afternoon to call Ethan because I want him to hear it from me first. The phone rings 4 times before he answers. There's a long silence after I tell him my decision, and then he asks if I'm sure, if I've really thought about what this means for us. I tell him I've thought about nothing else for days, and I've decided I can't live with letting his mother face no consequences for almost killing me. His voice breaks when he speaks again. He says he understands, but he doesn't know if he can stay married to someone who sends his mother to prison. My heart cracks, but I tell him that's his choice to make, just like pressing charges is mine. We both cry on the phone, and then the line goes dead without either of us saying goodbye. I walk out to the backyard and sit on the patio chair where Ethan and I talked just days ago. My mother finds me there 20 minutes later with tears running down my face. She sits next to me and pulls me against her shoulder while I sob about how I'm losing my marriage because I chose justice. She strokes my hair and tells me I'm not losing my marriage because of my choice. I'm losing it because Ethan chose his mother over me. The distinction matters even though the pain feels exactly the same. The next few days blur together with phone calls from lawyers and police as the case moves forward. The detective calls to tell me they're building a strong case with the text message, the mushroom identification book, testimony from the toxicologist, and Clarissa's partial confession to Ethan. They're pursuing charges of attempted murder and assault with intent to cause serious bodily harm. He explains the process and timeline, and I write everything down, even though I can barely focus. My phone rings at 7 in the morning 3 days later, and I see Ethan's name on the screen. When I answer, his voice is full of anger and pain. He tells me I've destroyed his family, that his mother is traumatized from being arrested, that his father is having health problems from the stress. I tell him his mother destroyed herself when she decided to poison me, and I won't accept blame for the consequences of her actions. He hangs up on me mid-sentence. Perdita calls that same afternoon, and her voice is gentle. She tells me she's proud of me for pressing charges, and she's sorry about Ethan's reaction. She says she's been talking to him, but he's not in a place to hear reason right now, because he's too focused on protecting their mother. She warns me that the family is circling the wagons, and I should prepare for them to make me the villain in this story, that they'll rewrite history to make Clarissa the victim. 2 days after Perdita's warning, Douglas called me. His voice was calm, but I could hear the anger underneath when he told me he'd already talked to the prosecutor about testifying. He said other family members had been reaching out to him after hearing about the charges, people who had their own stories about Clarissa's behavior over the years, cousins who stopped coming to family events because of her, an ex-girlfriend of his who Clarissa had harassed until she broke up with him, even Bernard's sister who hadn't spoken to Clarissa in a decade. Douglas explained that the prosecutor was building a pattern of conduct case, showing this wasn't just one mistake but part of how Clarissa operated when she felt threatened. The evidence was piling up, and it made me feel less alone, like I wasn't crazy for seeing her actions as deliberate. My first therapy appointment was that Thursday afternoon at a small office across town. The therapist was a middle-aged woman who specialized in trauma from family violence, and within 10 minutes of sitting down, I started crying. I told her I felt guilty for pressing charges even though I knew Clarissa had poisoned me on purpose, that I kept thinking about Ethan's pain and his family falling apart. She listened carefully, and then asked me why I thought my feelings mattered less than theirs. I didn't have a good answer. She explained that I'd been conditioned by Ethan and his family to put their comfort above my own safety, that this kind of thinking doesn't happen overnight, but gets built up through hundreds of small moments where my needs got dismissed. She said learning to prioritize myself would take time and work, but it was necessary if I wanted to heal. I left feeling exhausted, but also like someone had finally given me permission to be angry. The prosecutor called me 3 days later with news I wasn't expecting. Clarissa's lawyer had contacted her about a plea deal, offering to plead guilty to a lesser charge in exchange for probation instead of prison time. The prosecutor explained that trials are unpredictable, that juries can be swayed by defense tactics, and a plea deal would guarantee Clarissa faced some consequences. She asked what I thought, and I told her I needed time to think about it. I spent that night lying awake trying to figure out what justice actually meant to me, whether any outcome would feel like enough. The victim advocate helped me sort through my options when we met the next morning. She explained that aggravated assault with a plea deal would probably mean probation, community service, and mandatory counseling, but Clarissa wouldn't see the inside of a prison. She asked me how I'd feel at future family events, seeing Clarissa there knowing she'd face no real punishment for poisoning me. The question hit me hard because I realized I'd feel like everyone was agreeing that what she did wasn't that serious, that attempted murder with permanent consequences was just a family dispute that got out of hand. I couldn't live with that. I called the prosecutor back that afternoon and told her I wouldn't accept a plea deal without prison time. She warned me that going to trial was risky, that Clarissa's lawyers would try to paint this as a tragic accident by a confused elderly woman who made an honest mistake. I told her I understood the risks, but I needed to at least try for real justice, that I couldn't spend the rest of my life wondering if I'd given up too easily. She said she respected my decision, and we'd start preparing for trial. Ethan showed up at my parents' house 2 days later without calling first. My father answered the door, and I heard them talking in tense voices before my dad came to get me. He asked if I wanted him to send Ethan away, and I almost said yes, but I realized I needed closure more than I needed to avoid him. Ethan looked terrible when I walked into the living room, like he hadn't been sleeping. He asked if we could talk privately, and we went out to the backyard. He told me his mother's lawyers thought they could win at trial, that the accident story was believable because Clarissa had been foraging for decades without problems. Then he asked me one more time to drop the charges, said it wasn't too late to stop this. I looked at him standing there in my parents' yard and realized I didn't recognize the man I married anymore. The person I fell in love with would never ask me to protect someone who hurt me this badly, would never put his mother's freedom above my right to justice. I told him I wasn't dropping the charges and I thought we needed to start talking about separation, that I couldn't be married to someone who valued his mother's comfort over my safety. His face crumpled, but I felt strangely calm saying it out loud. Ethan left without arguing, and I went back inside to find my mother waiting in the kitchen. I started crying, and she held me while I sobbed about losing my marriage. She told me I did the right thing, that I couldn't build a life with someone who asks you to minimize your own trauma. My father came in and added that any man who won't stand up for his wife doesn't deserve to be a husband. Their words hurt because they were true. The case moved toward trial over the next several weeks, and I spent hours preparing with the prosecutor. We went over my testimony repeatedly, practiced answering the defense's likely questions, discussed every piece of evidence and what it proved. She showed me photos of the mushroom identification book with death caps circled in red pen, walked me through the text message timeline, explained how the toxicologist would testify about the deliberate nature of the poisoning. She told me I was a strong witness and the evidence was compelling, but she couldn't promise an outcome because juries were unpredictable. The trial date arrived faster than I expected, and I felt sick walking into the courthouse that morning. Neve drove me, and my parents followed in their car, and we all met outside the big stone building downtown. My hands shook as we walked through security and found the courtroom. I saw Ethan immediately, sitting on the left side of the room with his father, Bernard. They were on Clarissa's side of the courtroom, literally positioned as her supporters while I sat on the opposite side with my family. The visual of that divide, of Ethan choosing to sit with the woman who poisoned me instead of supporting his wife, confirmed what I already knew. Our marriage was over and had been since the moment he asked me to let his mother walk away from attempted murder. The trial started 3 weeks later, and I sat in the front row of the courtroom watching Clarissa's defense team set up their presentation boards. Her lawyer was a woman in her 50s who smiled warmly at the jury during opening statements and showed them photos of Clarissa at family gatherings, hugging grandchildren, serving Thanksgiving dinner, looking like everyone's sweet grandmother. The defense called character witnesses who talked about her volunteer work at the church, her decades of successful foraging, her reputation as a careful and knowledgeable mushroom expert. They painted a picture of a tragic accident, an experienced forager who made one terrible mistake after years of safe practice. The prosecutor stood up and methodically destroyed that narrative piece by piece. She displayed the text message on a large screen for the jury to read. She entered the mushroom identification book into evidence and showed how death caps were circled in red pen with notes in the margins about toxicity levels. She called the toxicologist who had treated me, and he explained in clinical detail how death cap poisoning works, how the toxins destroy liver cells, how even experienced foragers know these mushrooms are deadly. He showed the jury photos of death caps and explained that their distinctive features make them nearly impossible to confuse with edible varieties if you know what you're looking for. The prosecutor presented my medical records, page after page documenting the emergency treatments, the organ failure, the permanent damage. She showed the jury charts of my liver enzyme levels during those 6 days in the hospital, the dangerous spikes that indicated I was dying. The defense tried to argue that Clarissa genuinely believed the mushrooms were safe, that she ate from the same batch herself without getting sick. But the prosecutor pointed out that everyone else's portions came from the center of the bowl, while mine came from the edge where Clarissa had specifically placed the contaminated mushrooms. On the second day of trial, I took the stand, and the prosecutor walked me through the dinner in excruciating detail. I described how Clarissa insisted I eat, how she watched me with that intense stare, how she kept pushing me to finish my plate. I testified about the enormous portion she gave me compared to everyone else, about how she served me from the very edge of the bowl. I described the hours of violent vomiting, the emergency room, the doctors telling me my organs were failing. I talked about waking up each morning in the hospital not knowing if I would survive, about the treatments that felt like they were killing me while trying to save me. Clarissa's lawyer cross-examined me and tried to suggest I was exaggerating the severity of my illness or misremembering details about the dinner. She asked if I was certain Clarissa was watching me specifically, or if I might have imagined that due to my anxiety about wild mushrooms. She questioned whether I really remembered which part of the bowl my portion came from, or if I was reconstructing memories based on what I wanted to believe. But the medical records didn't lie, and the prosecutor had photos from the hospital showing how sick I actually was. The toxicologist took the stand again and explained that death cap mushrooms are among the most well-known deadly species, that any forager with decades of experience would absolutely recognize them. He testified that the amount of toxin in my system was consistent with intentional poisoning rather than accidental contamination, that cross-contamination wouldn't produce that level of poisoning in only one person. He showed the jury scientific studies about death cap toxicity and explained why Clarissa's story about an innocent mistake didn't match the medical evidence. Douglas testified next, and I watched Clarissa's face go pale as her son took the stand against her. He told the jury about his mother's history of targeting women who got close to her sons, about how she drove away his fiancé years ago through manipulation and lies. He described her pattern of control and jealousy, how she couldn't stand anyone threatening her position as the most important woman in her sons' lives. He talked about the mushroom identification book he'd seen in her house for years, how she'd shown him that exact book when teaching him about foraging as a child, how she'd specifically pointed out death caps as the most dangerous mushrooms to avoid. The defense tried to discredit him as a bitter son with an axe to grind, but his testimony matched too many details that other evidence had already established. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, and I sat in the hallway with my parents and Neve, unable to eat or drink anything. Ethan sat on the opposite side of the hallway with Bernard, neither of them looking in my direction. Perdita sat with me and held my hand when the bailiff called us back into the courtroom. The jury foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on aggravated assault charges, not guilty on attempted murder. I felt my whole body go numb as the words registered. Clarissa made a choking sound and started crying. Bernard put his arm around her. Ethan stared straight ahead with no expression on his face. The judge scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, and I walked out of the courthouse in a daze. 2 weeks after the verdict, I stood at a podium in front of the judge and read my victim impact statement. I described how the poisoning changed every aspect of my life, how I would need medical monitoring every 3 months for the rest of my existence, how I had permanent organ damage that increased my risk of liver disease and cancer. I talked about the psychological trauma of being poisoned by someone who was supposed to be family, about the nightmares I still had about that dinner, about how I couldn't trust food prepared by other people anymore. I explained how the poisoning destroyed my marriage because my husband chose to protect his mother instead of supporting me. I told the judge about the medical bills I would be paying for years, about the limitations the liver damage placed on my daily life, about the fear I lived with knowing my health would never fully recover. The judge listened carefully and then sentenced Clarissa to 4 years in prison with possibility of parole after 2 years. Clarissa broke down sobbing and Bernard had to help her stand. Ethan finally looked at me for the first time since the verdict, and his eyes were full of something I couldn't quite read, maybe anger or grief or both. We filed out of the courtroom and Perdita hugged me in the hallway, telling me I did the right thing, that maybe this would finally force their mother to face real consequences for her actions. I felt empty more than victorious, drained of everything except exhaustion. Ethan walked past me without a word, and Bernard glared at me with pure hatred before following his son. I went home to my parents' house and slept for 14 hours. The following week, I filed for divorce and Ethan didn't contest it. We divided our assets through lawyers and communicated only through legal representatives. His attorney passed along a message that Ethan would never forgive me for sending his mother to prison. My lawyer conveyed my response that I would never forgive his mother for poisoning me or him for asking me to accept it. The divorce process was cold and efficient, nothing like the warm partnership we'd once shared. We signed papers in separate rooms and I never saw him again after that day in the courthouse. 6 months after the trial, my divorce was finalized and I moved into a small 1-bedroom apartment across town. I had my 3-month liver checkup and the results came back stable. Not great, but not worse than before. My doctor told me I was doing as well as could be expected given the permanent damage, that I should be proud of how my body was managing the compromised liver function. I started learning to accept this as my new normal, the regular blood tests and ultrasounds, the careful monitoring of everything I ate and drank, the knowledge that my health would never be what it once was. I continued therapy twice a week and slowly started rebuilding my life in small increments. Neve invited me to her book club, and I met women who became friends without knowing anything about my story, unless I chose to share it. I got a promotion at work and threw myself into my career, finding satisfaction in accomplishments that had nothing to do with family drama or legal battles. I wasn't dating yet, but I didn't completely close myself off to the possibility eventually, when I felt ready to trust someone again. Perdita and I stayed in touch through regular phone calls and occasional coffee meetups. She told me Clarissa was struggling in prison but still maintained she didn't mean to hurt me that badly, that she only wanted to make me a little sick. Douglas reported that their mother would probably never take full responsibility for what she did, that she'd convinced herself her own version of events where she was more victim than perpetrator. I realized I might never get the apology or acknowledgement I deserved from Clarissa, might never hear her admit she deliberately tried to poison me with deadly mushrooms. I was learning to find closure without needing her validation, learning that justice didn't always come with the emotional satisfaction I'd hoped for. A year after the poisoning, I walked into my first support group meeting for survivors of family violence. The room was in a community center basement with folding chairs arranged in a circle and bad fluorescent lighting that made everyone look tired. I sat down and listened to other people share their stories, feeling my hands shake as my turn got closer. When the facilitator nodded at me, I started talking about the dinner, the mushrooms, the hospital, the trial, and how I lost my marriage because I chose to press charges. My voice cracked a few times, but I kept going, explaining how Clarissa got 4 years and how Ethan walked away rather than support me. After the meeting ended, several people came up to thank me for sharing, saying they wished they'd had the courage to do what I did. One woman grabbed my hand and told me my story gave her the strength to finally report her partner who'd been hurting her for years. She had tears in her eyes, and I realized that choosing justice had created ripples beyond just my own case, that maybe my pain had helped someone else find their way out. I still have hard days when I wake up angry about everything Clarissa took from me. My health will never be what it was. I have to get blood tests every 3 months to monitor my damaged liver, and I can't drink alcohol anymore or take certain medications. Some mornings I look at my medical alert bracelet and feel rage at how one dinner destroyed my body. But I also have good days where I feel strong for refusing to let her get away with it, for standing up in court and telling the truth even when it cost me my marriage. I'm building a life that's completely mine now, going to book club with Neve's friends, getting promoted at work, and slowly learning to trust people again. It's not the life I planned when I married Ethan, but it's one where I don't have to pretend attempted murder was just a mistake, or protect someone who tried to kill me. I survived, I fought back, and I'm still here. Well, that's another thrilling conclusion to a very average story. If you're still watching, I don't know whether to thank you or question your choices. Either way, you might as well subscribe.